Hours before Meghan Markle's private message reached its intended recipient, fragments of it were already circulating through royal circles. Someone had opened a door that was supposed to remain locked, and the wording inside the message threatened to expose a confrontation the palace had spent years trying to contain. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel for more hidden royal stories, palace secrets, and dramatic moments the monarchy would rather keep behind closed doors. This was not a friendly note written to rebuild damaged relationships. It was not a public statement prepared for newspapers, nor an emotional message sent in a moment of anger. Meghan had written it carefully, urgently, and with one clear purpose. It was meant for one of the most powerful figures inside the monarchy, a person capable of answering questions that palace advisors had avoided for years. Only a handful of people should have known it existed. Meghan, Harry, a trusted legal advisor, the royal figure expected to receive it, and a small palace communications team responsible for handling sensitive correspondence. The circle was narrow by design. Yet before the message could be formally acknowledged, selected phrases began appearing in conversations far beyond it. They were not vague summaries. They were exact fragments. That was the first proof of betrayal. The question immediately haunting both sides was not simply who had spoken. It was why. Had someone leaked the words to embarrass Meghan before she could explain herself? Had palace officials decided that damaging her credibility was the safest way to protect the monarchy? Or was the leak designed to provoke Harry, forcing him into an angry public response that could be used against him? Harry noticed something even more disturbing. One of the phrases being repeated came from a section that had never been sent through ordinary email. It had existed only inside a protected version reviewed by Meghan, Harry, and their advisor. To Harry, that ruled out an outsider. Meghan's reaction went deeper than anger. She believed the leak confirmed a fear she had carried for years, that private attempts to communicate with the royal family were being watched, filtered, and possibly redirected before reaching the people they were intended for. The hidden subject of the message made the breach even more dangerous. It concerned access to the royal family, the treatment of Harry's children, and a promise allegedly made before the couple left Britain. Buried inside was one sentence capable of reopening a bitter argument involving inheritance, royal status, and Meghan's place within the family. Behind palace doors, officials quietly ordered an internal review. Publicly, however, the position remained cold and absolute. No message existed. No leak had occurred. Nothing required an answer. But before the palace could discover who had released Meghan's words, it first had to confront the far more dangerous question: why had she written them at all? The message did not begin with an accusation. It began with a reminder, a private promise Meghan believed had been made when she and Harry stepped away from royal life. But as the message continued, that reminder became a warning, and the palace understood exactly what she was threatening to expose. According to Meghan, the assurance had been given during the final negotiations over their departure from senior royal duties. It was not a promise of money, restored titles, or a return to ceremony. It was something quieter, but far more personal: continued access to family, direct communication with senior royals, and protection from unofficial palace briefings that could damage the Sussexes before they had a chance to respond. In her message, Meghan argued that this understanding had not been broken in one dramatic moment. It had been weakened slowly. Messages went unanswered. Conditions changed without explanation. Decisions involving Harry were made before he was consulted. Each incident could be dismissed alone, but together they formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. The deepest wound involved Archie and Lilibet. Meghan questioned whether the children were being treated as genuine members of the family or as royal symbols mentioned only when public appearances demanded unity. Harry understood her anger, yet he also feared what would happen if they pushed too hard. He wanted answers, but he knew that challenging the palace could destroy the few family relationships he still had left. Then came the phrase that caused immediate alarm: what was agreed behind closed doors. Those words suggested memory, evidence, and perhaps written records. Senior aides began asking whether Harry had preserved notes from the final negotiations, or whether Meghan possessed messages proving that private assurances had once been made. The letter did not demand privilege. It demanded acknowledgement. That distinction divided the palace. Some advisers argued that replying would give Meghan's claims legitimacy. Others warned that silence would look like confirmation if the full message ever became public. A senior royal reportedly believed Meghan was attempting to rewrite the terms of the couple's departure. Harry believed the opposite. To him, the palace had already rewritten those terms whenever public pressure made earlier promises inconvenient. The most dangerous section came near the end. Meghan named a palace practice she believed had been used to isolate Harry from private family decisions, allowing information to reach commentators before it reached him. One trusted aide finally warned that if the full message leaked, the argument would no longer be about Meghan's personality. It would be about whether the monarchy kept its private promises. That fear triggered a silent emergency inside the royal household, where protecting the crown suddenly became more important than discovering whether Meghan's accusations were true. Behind palace doors, Meghan's message was placed on a table before advisers who had spent years controlling royal crises. They did not read it as an emotional appeal. They read it as evidence, leverage, and possibly a declaration of war, and one person in that room saw an opportunity. The meeting brought together communications advisors, legal representatives, household officials, and a senior royal secretary trusted with protecting the monarchy from private disputes becoming public disasters. Every person present understood the danger. This was no longer just a family disagreement. Meghan had included dates, remembered conversations, and verbal assurances palace officials believed had never been formally recorded. Printed copies were numbered before being distributed. Each recipient was warned that no page, note, or summary could leave the room. Access was meant to be traceable. If anything escaped, investigators would know where to begin. Almost immediately, the room split. One group argued that Meghan deserved a private answer. They believed silence would deepen Harry's anger and make the palace appear afraid of its own promises. The other group wanted a stronger response prepared before the message could become public. To them, Meghan was not asking for recognition. She was building a case. The possibility that Harry had kept notes from key meetings created quiet panic. If documents supported even part of Meghan's account, the palace could not dismiss the letter as emotion. One advisor still tried, calling it pressure disguised as concern. Another warned that the public might see something far simpler: a mother asking why her children were discussed publicly but excluded privately. The monarchy faced a trap. Any reply could be leaked by the Sussex side, but refusing to respond would leave Meghan's version unchallenged. Then, someone proposed sharing a summary with trusted external voices before the story broke. The request was officially rejected. Yet officials were told they could prepare background guidance without distributing the message itself. That wording created the opening. Near the end of the meeting, one figure gathered handwritten notes and left despite clear instructions that all materials remain inside. This person had long-standing access to royal correspondence and former palace employees who regularly shaped public debate. More importantly, they believed Harry's return to private negotiations threatened the influence of advisers who had grown powerful after his departure. Less than an hour later, a journalist received a message containing an exact phrase from Meghan's letter. Not a summary, not an interpretation. Her words. The leak had begun, but it was not released all at once. It was fed to the outside world piece by piece. carefully shaped to make Meghan appear dangerous before anyone knew what she had actually written. The public had not yet seen Meghan's message, but a version of it was already being constructed for them. Sentences were shortened. Context disappeared. A request for private accountability became a royal ultimatum, and the person controlling the fragments knew exactly which words would provoke the strongest reaction. Within hours, several royal commentators received nearly identical descriptions of the letter. The wording was too similar to be coincidence. This was not one careless conversation spreading beyond the palace. It was a coordinated briefing, shaped carefully enough to look like several independent sources were confirming the same story. Meghan's concern about continued family access was transformed into a demand for restored royal privileges. Her reference to broken promises was presented as a threat to expose private conversations. A sentence about protecting Archie and Lilibet was stripped of everything around it and used to suggest she was placing the children at the center of a negotiation. The paragraphs showing pain were missing. There was no mention of Meghan questioning why messages went unanswered, why Harry learned about family decisions from the press, or why their children seemed welcome in public statements but distant from private life. Those passages made her sound vulnerable. The briefing needed her to sound aggressive. Harry recognized the manipulation immediately. Reports began using words such as deadline, conditions, and demands, even though none of them appeared in the original message. To him, that proved the source was not simply repeating Meghan's language. Someone was rewriting her purpose. Meghan feared something even darker. Perhaps the palace was testing public reaction before deciding whether to answer. If the audience rejected her first, officials could ignore the letter without appearing cruel. Then, a journalist privately contacted a Sussex representative. The journalist admitted the information had come from someone with direct knowledge of the palace meeting. Publicly, the royal household refused to comment. Privately, unnamed sources continued describing Meghan as impatient, confrontational, and determined to regain influence. But one small detail betrayed the source. The leaked description used an outdated royal title for Harry, language no longer common in public statements, but still preserved inside internal briefing templates. That narrowed the list to a small group with access to restricted communications material. An investigator compared every published phrase with the numbered copies distributed during the meeting. One version contained a distinctive punctuation error. The same error appeared in the journalist's notes. It was copy 4, not Meghan's copy, not Harry's, not the legal advisor's. It belonged to a senior official trusted to protect the sovereign's private correspondence. The palace finally knew which document had been compromised. What it did not yet understand was that the person who shared it had not acted alone. The numbered copy led investigators to Eleanor Vale, a fictional senior communications advisor trusted with the monarchy's most sensitive family disputes. But when confronted, she did not deny sharing Meghan's words. Instead, she revealed that the leak had begun with an instruction from someone far more powerful. Vale had spent years managing stories the palace could never discuss openly. She understood which details could calm a scandal, which phrases could redirect public anger, and which private conflicts had to be buried before they threatened the crown. Copy 4 of Meghan's message had been assigned to her, the only version containing the punctuation error later repeated in journalists' notes. Investigators soon uncovered calls between Vale and a retired royal correspondent made shortly after the emergency meeting. She had not photographed the document or sent the full letter. Her method was more controlled. She dictated selected phrases, removed the emotional context, and supplied a summary designed to make Meghan's request sound like an ultimatum. Vale did not describe her actions as betrayal. She insisted she was protecting institutional stability. In her view, Meghan's message could pressure the monarchy into restoring Harry's influence over private royal decisions. That possibility threatened advisors who had gained authority after his departure. Then came the confession that changed the investigation. A senior household advisor had told Vale that the atmosphere must be prepared before any official response was issued. It was not a direct command to leak the message. The wording was deliberately vague, allowing the person behind it to deny responsibility while knowing exactly how Vale would interpret it. She had done this before. Unofficial briefings, selective summaries, carefully placed phrases, these were not desperate tactics invented for Meghan. They were part of an established system used during earlier royal crises whenever the palace wanted public opinion shaped without leaving official fingerprints. Harry's fury was immediate. Before Meghan's message had even been acknowledged, someone inside the institution had already decided how the public should judge her. To Meghan, the wound cut deeper. Her words had not been stolen by an obvious enemy. They had been weaponized by people who claimed they were protecting the family. The retired correspondent had passed Vale's version to several outlets, making one source appear to be many. Yet the palace could not expose Vale publicly without revealing its long relationship with unofficial media briefings. So silence became protection. Before the questioning ended, Vale issued one final warning. Meghan's message was not the only private document circulating outside its intended circle. Another leak existed, one capable of connecting the operation directly to a senior royal household. Identifying Eleanor Vale answered who first shared Meghan's message. But her confession opened a darker question. How many royal crises had been manufactured through the same hidden system? Harry had expected resistance, but not proof that Meghan's private appeal had been turned into a public weapon. His response was immediate and devastating. Either the palace admitted how the leak happened, or he would reveal the private negotiations that Meghan's message had only hinted at. He refused to communicate through another chain of aides. No more carefully written replies. No more messages softened by advisors before reaching the person who mattered. Harry demanded a direct explanation from the senior royal who had received Meghan's letter. He wanted to know who authorized the briefing campaign and why her private concerns had been reshaped before the palace had even answered them. A quiet apology was offered behind closed doors. Harry rejected it. An apology to Meghan would mean little, he argued, if the system that had targeted her remained untouched. Eleanor Vale had shared the words, but she had already admitted that someone above her had prepared the conditions. Unless that person was identified, the palace would simply sacrifice one official and continue as before. Harry's ultimatum was clear. Reveal who authorized the campaign, or he would release his own records from the negotiations surrounding their departure. Those records, he claimed, included emails, personal notes, and messages documenting assurances the palace now appeared desperate to deny. The threat caused private panic. Officials did not know exactly what Harry possessed, and that uncertainty made every possibility dangerous, yet Harry was not untouched by the cost. Releasing the documents could defend Meghan and expose the machinery behind the leak. It could also humiliate relatives he still loved and destroy relationships that had survived only through silence. Meghan urged him not to act from rage. She understood that another quiet settlement might allow the palace to escape responsibility. But she also knew anger could be used to make Harry look reckless. One senior royal privately expressed sympathy, then refused to challenge the household structure in public. Another family member warned that a full battle would permanently damage Archie and Lilibet's future connection to the monarchy. Harry rejected that warning. His children, he said, could not be treated as silent symbols whose names protected adults from consequences. Meanwhile, advisors prepared two statements. One blamed an unauthorized employee. The other denied Meghan's message contained proof of any promise. Eleanor Vale was offered a discreet departure package in exchange for silence, but she refused to sign unless protected from being portrayed as the sole architect. Then, Harry received an anonymous document. It was an internal palace memo discussing media strategy before Meghan's message had reached its intended royal recipient. That memo changed everything. Because it suggested the leak was not a desperate reaction to Meghan's words, it may have been planned before the palace officially received them. The internal memo carried a timestamp that should have been impossible. It was created before Meghan's message entered the palace's official records, meaning someone had known it was coming. The betrayal had begun earlier, and suspicion now turned toward a person standing dangerously close to Harry. The draft media strategy had been prepared shortly before the message was formally delivered. It already referred to broken promises, private family access, and the possibility of renewed pressure from the Sussexes. Palace officials had not yet read Meghan's words, yet they appeared to know the heart of her argument. That meant someone had warned them. Suspicion moved toward the small circle of legal and personal intermediaries who had helped prepare the message. Among them was Daniel Mercer, a fictional former Sussex liaison who had once worked closely with Harry's team while maintaining quiet relationships inside the royal household. He understood both sides. He also knew how quickly a private concern could become a palace crisis. Mercer admitted that he had contacted an official before the letter was sent. He insisted he never shared the document or repeated its exact wording. He had only warned that Meghan was preparing a serious written challenge and hoped the advance notice would encourage a calm, private response. Instead, the warning gave palace strategists time to build a defense before they knew precisely what they were defending against. For Meghan, the discovery was crushing. One person had alerted the palace. Another had leaked selected phrases. Several more had reshaped those fragments into something harsher. The betrayal no longer came from one direction. It surrounded her. Mercer maintained that he had acted to prevent another public breakdown. But palace officials had interpreted his warning differently. They believed Meghan was preparing a coordinated campaign and that the monarchy risked being trapped if it waited. Years of distrust had changed the meaning of every gesture. A private letter became a threat. A request for acknowledgement became leverage. Emotion was treated as strategy before anyone asked whether the pain behind it might be real. Harry finally understood the deeper problem. The palace system no longer separated family communication from political risk. Every message was assessed not for what it meant, but for what damage it might cause. The senior advisor behind Eleanor Vale's instruction had used Mercer's warning to argue that the monarchy had to move first. Then came the final danger. Someone outside both camps had obtained the complete message. An anonymous account issued a deadline. Unless the palace acknowledged the leak within 24 hours, Meghan's letter would be released in full. For the first time, neither Meghan nor the palace controlled what would happen next, and the full truth was now one click away from becoming a global spectacle. When the complete message finally appeared, it did not resemble the ruthless ultimatum the public had been promised. It was personal, restrained, and painfully direct. Yet buried near the end was one line so damaging that even Meghan's supporters had not expected the palace to survive it without answering. The palace had allowed the 24-hour deadline to expire without acknowledging the leak. Soon afterward, an anonymous source published the message in full. The release destroyed the carefully prepared version that had circulated for days. Meghan's language was calm. There were no threats of revenge, no demand for public surrender, and no attempt to force her way back into royal life. Instead, she described Harry's pain at discovering important family decisions through newspapers and commentators before hearing from his relatives. Each new report, she wrote, made him feel less like a son and more like an outsider studying his own family from a distance. Her words about Archie and Lilibet were equally direct. Meghan questioned why the children could be mentioned in public messages of unity while remaining absent from meaningful private relationships. She did not demand official funding, restored duties, or greater status. She asked whether family connection still existed when every conversation seemed controlled by advisors. Then came the sentence that changed the entire crisis. Meghan claimed that a senior palace representative had promised that private family communication would never again be used for media advantage. Suddenly, the leak itself became more damaging than anything Meghan had written. If her claim was true, the palace had not merely failed to protect a confidential message. It had broken the very assurance at the center of that message. Public opinion divided immediately. Critics still accused Meghan of applying pressure through private correspondence. Others asked why her words had been shortened, distorted, and presented as an ultimatum before anyone had read them. Inside the palace, a prepared denial became unusable. Internal records showed that confidential communication had been discussed during earlier negotiations, even if officials disputed Meghan's interpretation of the promise. Eleanor Vale understood the danger. If the palace needed one person to blame, she was the easiest sacrifice, despite the instructions she claimed came from above. Harry's reaction was torn. The release cleared Meghan of several accusations, but it was also another violation she had never chosen. Meghan refused to celebrate the shift in sympathy. Public support could not repair the private trust that had been destroyed. Then, the senior royal recipient made a decision. Advisors were pushed aside, official channels were abandoned, and Harry was contacted directly. The call Harry had demanded finally came, but it did not offer the confession he expected. It offered a choice that could determine whether he remained connected to the monarchy at all. The palace could dismiss Eleanor Vale, deny the hidden order, and allow the institution to survive. Harry could release the remaining evidence and expose the entire briefing system. But Meghan understood the cruelest truth. Winning the public battle might destroy the last private connection their family still possessed. The long-awaited conversation began without advisors, prepared statements, or carefully controlled intermediaries. Harry spoke directly to the senior royal who had received Meghan's message. The royal figure expressed regret that the letter had escaped, but refused to accept that the institution had deliberately targeted Meghan. Harry would not allow the discussion to end there. Eleanor Vale had admitted that a senior household advisor told her to prepare the media atmosphere. Regret was not accountability. He demanded to know whether the person who issued that instruction would face consequences. The palace offered a compromise. Vale would leave royal service. Internal briefing rules would be reviewed. Future communications involving Archie and Lilibet would receive stronger protection. But the senior advisor would not be publicly identified. Naming that person, Harry was warned, could expose how deeply unofficial briefing practices reached into the wider household. To Meghan, the pattern was painfully familiar. Responsibility could be acknowledged privately, but the institution would never accept the public cost of admitting how its system operated. Harry still possessed the memo and the records from earlier negotiations. Releasing them could expose years of hidden media manipulation. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. Meghan asked one question: would exposing everything protect their children, or bind Archie and Lilibet forever to another royal scandal? Harry chose not to publish the archive immediately. But he refused to destroy it. Copies were placed with legal representatives, ensuring the evidence could not disappear if another private communication was leaked. Eleanor Vale left palace service without explanation. Commentators were encouraged to describe her departure as routine. The senior household advisor remained in place, protected by the same silence that had allowed the betrayal to begin. Days later, Meghan received a brief reply to her original message. It acknowledged pain, distance, and damaged trust, but it avoided the promise at the center of the crisis. The leak had been contained. The monarchy survived. Yet Meghan received confirmation of what she had feared most. The palace might regret the damage, but protecting the system would always come before admitting how that damage was done. Soon afterward, another sealed message entered the palace. The message had exposed its leaker, shaken the palace, and forced a private reckoning, but behind royal doors, the most dangerous secrets are rarely destroyed. They are simply placed back into the system, waiting for the next person brave enough to speak.